Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another live broadcast of today's Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, and I'm coming to you from the smart land of Glasgow in heartland of Scotland. We've got listeners all the way down in Australia, up to Alaska, Norway to Nebraska, and we do that all thanks to Truth Frequency Radio, tfrlive.com. So wherever you are, whenever you are, whatever timeline you're on, many dimensions tuning in, I would imagine as well. You're all welcome here, equally welcome. And tonight, this is one show that I've been looking forward to ever since we put it together. And I have got an absolute bonanza of woo coming for all of you today. You know, today's guest, we've actually been in contact with each other a lot longer than some people might actually think, because it was only recently that we teamed up and started working together with Bill Bean over on Warrior Mode. And I am, of course, talking about Travis Short. Now, me and Travis have been in touch a long time. He helped me put together the show with Tia Bell. Remember when we had Tia on? Caused such controversy at the time, which totally baffled me, but it really invigorated myself and Travis behind the scenes because we think alike. We're very serious, but we're very boisterous as well. We like to have a little laugh along the way, and that's why today I know we're all going to be treated to something very, very special, because Travis brings with him a very, very special skill set. And for people who don't know him, Travis Short has been interested in the paranormal, supernatural, and the occult since a very young age. And he trained early in his life to be a minister, and he holds a degree in English with a concentration in communication from the University of Virginia's College at Wise, and is near completion, or probably has completed, a master's degree by now in theology from the Masters International School of Divinity. Now, he is also a host, a narrator, a producer, a researcher, and a writer of something called Dark Wings, the Mothman Chronicle. He's also the co-host over on Warrior Mode with myself and Bill Payne. Makes him one of the 3 weirdest musketeers in the world. And he's a manager for various radio stations, so welcome to the show. At long last, long overdue, Travis Short. How you doing? And he's muted up. It's a good start. It's a good start. It's a great start. There he is.
Coming from someone who manages radio stations, and I go on mute. Apologies. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
It proves that you're just real, like the rest of us, Travis. It really, really does. So, it's great to have you here today on what I call my main game in town, the Kev Baker Show. We're going all around the world via Truth Frequency Radio. And we're not as restricted as maybe we sometimes are over on a platform like YouTube. We really do have free speech here today. And I can't wait to get into all of the topics that we're going to get into. But first and foremost, I want to kind of mention Warrior Mode. That's something that came out of the blue for both of us, and something that I think, and I'll get your opinion on this, but it's almost taking on a life of its own, right?
Oh, absolutely. I even made that comment to you guys the other night. It really is getting to the point where that Warrior Mode could be a daily show tackling different topics, because we branched from the esoteric and religious and the supernatural and paranormal now to doing mainstream entertainment interviews like we did Sunday night, which was such a blast, interviewing Liberty DeVito, drummer for Billy Joel for over 30 years. And it's very organic when we did the shows.
It was really weird how I even got involved, Travis, because I noticed Bill was setting out on this new mission to start his own kind of podcast, and the first week he done it, I know Bill, he's not the technical kind of sort. That's what I bring to the party. And I thought, well, I can do that. I enjoy doing that. I didn't think it would be on air, though. I really thought I'd be kind of in the background. I'd change screens for him. And I tell you what, everything at the right time for the right reason. In Warrior Mode, I'm just excited to see where it goes from here. But let's backtrack. Let's go back in time before we look forward to one of my favourite stories. And that is, of course, the Mothman. Now, we've spoke about the Mothman before, but I really want to get into all of it again today, just to kind of make this a real standalone deep dive into all things Mothman, cryptid, and wherever we go from there. So, first and foremost, what got you interested, Travis, in the Mothman story?
Well, you know, as you mentioned in my bio, I've been interested in the supernatural and the paranormal since I was a kid. And it really, for me, was born out of my dad was a coal miner. He retired about a decade ago from underground coal mining. And he would work the evening shift. So he would go to work at like 3 and come home around midnight. And at that time, when I was growing up, CBS here in the States was rerunning a show that had premiered in the 70s, Kolchak the Night Stalker, starring Darren McGavin. And what I loved about that show was Kolchak was just a news reporter who was always assigned a story, and there always ended up being some type of supernatural element that came out of nowhere, and then it would take a decidedly paranormal turn. And so I was fascinated by that show. It only ran for one season, 13 episodes and 2 made-for-TV movies, but it really got my interest in all things supernatural and paranormal. And of course, the creator of the show had patterned Kolchak after the father of Fortean ideology. So that was kind of my introduction to supernatural and paranormal. I've loved UFOs and cryptids. Bigfoot has always been a fascination of mine. The Loch Ness Monster growing up, and I know that speaks directly to your heart, Kev, but the Loch Ness Monster was actually more important to me growing up than Bigfoot and Mothman. Mothman came onto my radar, no pun intended, since it is a flying cryptid. It came onto the radar for me in 2001, 2002. At the time, I was the president and managing partner for an advertising agency. We had offices in Virginia and Las Vegas. And we would go to Vegas about twice a year, myself and my business partner. And those that are familiar with Vegas, I love Vegas. I love everything about it. It speaks to my inner Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr. I love it. I love the energy. But if you are not from Vegas and you insert yourself into Vegas, there is what we discovered maximum exposure to Las Vegas. So after about 7 to 9 days of doing meetings and conferences and visiting clients and the late night meals and the late night meetings, we decided that we needed to find a way to decompress. So we did that by driving into the desert. We would go find ghost towns and we would drive around and just explore the surrounding outside of Vegas. And one of those trips actually took us to Rachel, Nevada, which is about 90 to 100 miles north of Vegas. And Rachel is famous for being the geographic location of Groom Lake, Nevada, or better known by Area 51. And there was a great little place there called the Little Ailey Inn, which was a little hotel, actually it was a motel, and restaurant. And then adjacent to that was the Area 51 Research Center. Do not be misled and have a misperception about what this facility was. It was an old silver camper that had been gutted and renovated, and it was full of books and souvenirs and posters and novelties and things like that. And we actually picked up a book by Jerome Clark that outlined various supernatural, unexplained phenomena from all over the world. But on the drive back from Rachel, I was driving. My friend and business partner, Charlie McCracken, was in the passenger seat, and he had the overhead light on, and he's struggling through and looking at different stories, and one popped up, Mothman of West Virginia. And of course, he and I are from Virginia, and we're in the southwestern portion of the state of Virginia. And individuals know the outline of the state of Virginia. It's a little bit like a sideways triangle, so that you've got the eastern shore of Virginia, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, that area, up around D.C., and then it kind of dips down into a corner that is wedged between West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And that little sliver is where he and I were from. So we realized that West Virginia being a very small state, Point Pleasant couldn't be that far from us. So we made a mental note that one day, if we ever had the chance, we were going to explore this area and investigate this creature, the Mothman. Now, you fast forward about 2 years, and he and I had we had sold the ad agency, had liquidated, sold to another individual. We had started a film company, Black River Films, and we were doing marketing films, and we still did some television commercials and things like that. And we were actually shooting a marketing film for a small college in Ashland, Kentucky. And we stopped to get gas and pick up some snacks for the trip back home to Virginia. At that point, we were about 2 hours away from home. And so in the convenience store, one of Charlie's favorite things to do was to, at this point, get maps, the actual fold-out maps. And,
oh, remember them? Remember those?
I know.
Wow.
I know that, and I remember pagers and payphones too.
Imagine getting nostalgic over a damn map.
A map, I know. It's like that meme I've seen on Facebook that goes around. You know, it's like the kid and the dad are in the car, and the dad's like, "Let me get the map out," and the kid's like, "Hold it, Indiana Jones."
Like they'll dial up phones as well.
I know.
They just look at them, you know.
I know. Give them, you know, a rotary phone. They wouldn't know what to do with it. Or, you know, Wi-Fi now and instant internet. I mean, I remember, I still can hear the dial-up tone as the computer would connect to the modem and would listen to that.
The AOL tone of death, as I used to call it, man.
Yes. So we got a map, and we were looking. We realized we were about an hour to an hour and a half from Point Pleasant. So what turned into a one-day shoot in Kentucky turned into a two-day trip into Point Pleasant. We drove into town, met several of the people there, and just fell in love with the town, with the people, with the history, because it's not just Mothman. There's a great deal of American history there, predating the Civil War. I'm sorry, predating the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. But it was just a fascinating place for us. And so we kind of decided at that point we were going to further investigate Mothman and the sightings. And it was really interesting at that point in time. This was, you know, a good 20 years ago. And when we stopped at the Convention and Visitor Center and we asked about Mothman, they laughed at us and said, "We don't talk about that here, but if you want to hear those stories, there's some crazy people on Main Street. You can go talk to them." And that's exactly who we went and talked to, the people on Main Street, the locals, the people that had lived with it, the people that had grown up during the time of the sightings, the collapse of the Silver Bridge, and all of those things. And those are the people that we fell in love with, and those are the people's story that we wanted to tell. Because what we discovered was there's the supernatural element of Mothman, there was the economic impact of Mothman, there was the sociological impact on the sightings and how it impacted these individuals, and that there is this ongoing, you know, 50-plus year mystery now about what this entity was, what it was doing there, will it ever come back, has it been seen since? And those are all stories that we wanted to delve into, and that was what became, after 6 years of production work, and we started in 2003 and we finished in 2009, and the movie poster you see behind me, Darkling's the Mothman Chronicle.
So my whole experience and most of my information before coming into contact with you, like many people, heavily based upon the research and the works of John Keel. And I was going to ask you, when you set about, or you decided to make your own documentary, did you decide to almost retrace the John Keel footsteps, or an entirely fresh perspective and investigation on the whole topic?
Well, actually, it was a combination of both. I read the Mothman Prophecy, so that was kind of the first step in this whole process. And Jeff Walmsley, who runs the Mothman Museum there in Point Pleasant, he and Donnie Sturgeon had written the book together. And then Jeff had authored one by himself, Mothman Behind the Red Eyes. And so those were two other pieces that I used for the research. And then I was very fortunate, and it took some doing, but I was very fortunate to actually interview John Keel on a couple of occasions and get first-hand experiences and accounts from him. So we took that, and as we talked on the Warrior Mode episode, the problem, it's not a problem, but Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, isn't a book or a novel per se. It's very much a journal. It is very stream of consciousness. It's disjointed. You really have to go into this realizing that what you're doing is reading episodes that were happening, not just in Point Pleasant, but all over the country as Keel was tracking some of these things down.
I had to kind of re-listen. I had the audiobook, which was, I usually love audiobooks, but in this case, I think it would have been easier to, like you say, it's out of sequence.
It
And
is.
if you have the book, it's probably going to be easier to like replace the segments. But
Yes.
I'm kind of a hats off to you, sir. To me, John Keel. I mean, the fact you interviewed him, that would be a claim to fame for me. That's up there with my Geordie Rose, in my opinion. Yeah.
Exactly. I have, we talked the other night, I haven't done an entertainment interview in some time, but I've done 2 in the past week now, because I don't do a lot of on-air at the radio stations that I manage. I'm too busy doing all the unfun stuff. I'm not really a personality. I just kind of manage and make sure that bills get paid and everybody gets their paychecks and things like that. But so, we interviewed Liberty on Sunday night.
That was awesome, wasn't it? What a guy.
It was amazing, just top-notch, just down-to-earth guy.
And I mean, I must admit, Travis, I really didn't know little. I knew little about the guy. I can't sit there and pretend, I can't believe I've known about this guy for all my life and things. I wasn't that guy. But the first thing that struck me was, first and foremost, what an amazing human being,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He was just a good guy. Somebody you'd want to sit in the pub and have a drink with.
Exactly.
And just get to know him and continue talking. And then a couple weeks ago, I got to interview Eddie Perez, who is an Emmy nominated and Emmy award-winning producer on Showtime's Shameless series. And I interviewed him for a segment. And one of my favorite all-time entertainment interviews actually was Percy Sledge, the soul singer. I got to interview Percy on 2 occasions, one for TV and one for radio, and it was amazing. Had just an amazing time interviewing him. That was kind of my throw point.
I actually got the chance to interview an ambassador to the Red Dragon Society with his 10,000 ninjas as well. It's a claim to fame for an entirely different reason.
Exactly. Oh, and if we're going down that road, there's another.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
We're not going down that road.
No.
But it was interesting. Keel, and you pick this up when you're reading the Mothman Chronicle. He was a very paranoid individual. He felt, and with good reason, that he was being spied on by government agencies, FBI, CIA, NSA, Men in Black. There was a lot of turmoil personally for him. And so he had become a recluse by the time that we started working the documentary. And I give all of the credit to Jeff Walmsley in Point Pleasant there at the museum. He was able to orchestrate a couple of phone interviews with John, and to hear firsthand him account for me what took him to Point Pleasant, what attracted him to Point Pleasant, what he thought about Mothman, and the other things that were going on. Because as I mentioned, Mothman is just one of many events that were occurring in Point Pleasant. You had Men in Black, you had UFOs, you had hauntings, you had animal mutilations, you had occult activity, you had government, there was a site of a government facility that was built during World War II. So there's all of these elements that kind of come together in this little tiny town of Point Pleasant, that in 1966, when the sightings happened, had about 5,800 individuals. And the last census that they have, it's at about 4,800. So it's a town that hasn't fluctuated a whole lot in its size or in its growth, and a lot of economic depression from the collapse of the Silver Bridge. There were a lot of these things that we just really wanted to get individuals' first-hand accounts on. And when we shot the documentary, we chose to do it specifically long-style interview format. So there's no edit in the interviews. The camera is set on myself and the interviewer, and I'm asking questions and they're answering, because the one thing we did not want to do was put words in their mouths. We wanted them to tell their story from their perspective in their own words.
A very good way of doing it when you show it without any edits, because especially nowadays, people question everything, and things can be edited to sound a variety of ways with just the one kind of soundbite. It's crazy. But
I worked for a while with a reality TV show production company out of LA, and we shot several reality show pilots. They never were picked up, but we shot the pilots, and it's amazing what you can do in post-production editing, because all you do is give people a scenario, they act it out, and then you edit it the way you want it to play out on screen.
We're going to have to talk after the show, because one of our listeners, remember, I didn't tell you the other night, our claim to fame, our celebrity listener, not kind of celebrity, but more from the reality side,
Mhm.
I'll tell you after the show. Anyway, I digress,
Sounds
right?
good.
So,
Sounds good.
you're up there. You're
Yes.
doing this now. Out of the people that you spoke to, who is it that really stands out the most? And if you would, I mean, give us what their experience was, what their take was on what went down in Point Pleasant.
When we talk about the events of Point Pleasant, we're starting on November 15th, 1966, and they continue to December 15th, 1967. And of the individuals that we interviewed, and there were many. And as a matter of fact, in the final edit, when we did the first edit on the documentary, it was almost 4 hours long. It's like Peter Jackson type stuff. It's like, well, people will sit through the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They're not going to sit through a 4-hour documentary. So we edited it down. We got it down to 3 hours, and we got it down to 2.5, and we got it down to 2. We finally ended up editing the entire documentary into about 70 to 75 minutes is what it is. And part of what we wanted to do was, Mothman had made appearances in small forms in books and in vignettes. Unsolved Mysteries had done a segment. There have been other places that had done a 15-minute segment or a 30-minute segment, but nothing in a long format. So we wanted to do something that would be considered feature length. So anything beyond 60 minutes is considered feature length. So this is our claim to fame on this documentary, is it's the first feature-length documentary film about the sightings of Mothman. And I'm very excited, and I'll make an announcement a little bit later, but some very exciting news about the documentary and the direction that we're going in. But all of the individuals that I was able to interview, besides John Keel, who kind of embodies the voice of the Mothman prophecies.
Most people, even if they don't realize it, has got the Keelian take of
Yes.
Mothman.
Yes. And the one interview that really stood out was Linda Scarberry. And Linda and her husband, Roger, and another couple, the Millettes, were the original eyewitnesses at the TNT area, which is about 10 miles north of Point Pleasant. And the TNT area is the location I was referring to that had been constructed as a government facility during World War II.
Which in itself is quite interesting to have that at the heart of this,
It is. Well, if you look at at West Virginia at the time, from the early 1950s through the early 70s, you had 3 main supernatural events that were occurring there. You had the Flatwoods Monster, which occurred in West Virginia, and that happened in the early 1950s, about 1953. And then you had Indrid Cole, who makes an appearance in the Mothman Prophecies book and movie. The movie takes it and turns it into something that really was not part of the Keel narrative, but that was happening in Mineral Springs, West Virginia. And then you have Point Pleasant with the Mothman. And if you look at a map, ironically, you can make a distinct triangle out of these 3 locations. So it's almost like West Virginia has its own Bermuda Triangle, where that supernatural and paranormal phenomenon is taking place. And for Keel to be attracted here, for this to take place with the government facility, as I mentioned, it's today it's the McClintock Wildlife Reserve. At the time, it was the West Virginia Ordnance Works, and it had been built, used, and totally abandoned within probably a 5-year time span. It's totally been reclaimed by nature. But this area had been built for the sole purpose of the manufacturing and the storage of trinitrotoluene, or TNT, which is why now it's called the TNT area. And there's still igloos there, concrete igloos that have been covered in grass and dirt so that they could not be seen by possible enemy aircraft during World War II. But when World War II was going on, the majority of the explosives that were being used were being manufactured, stored, and shipped from this particular government facility. And so you skip forward from World War II to the late 1960s, 1966, November 15th, Roger and Linda and the Millettes were out here hot rodding. Roger has a 57 Chevy, and if you ever look at a terrain layout of West Virginia, it's very curvy, a lot of hills and mountains, but this area had one of the only straight patches of roads, so the kids would go out and they would drag race. And that's why they were all out there that night. And there were 2 power plants at the facility to power the entire West Virginia Ordnance Works, and one was the North Power Plant, and the other was the South Power Plant. The North Power Plant is the site where the Scarberries and the Millettes saw this engine.
Hold that thought. Perfect timing. We'll be right back. At 5'6" tall, I struggle to stand tall in the face of hobbits. So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I've got Travis Short here with me today. Your air conditioning is crazy, Travis.
Is it still picking up?
Yeah, it's either that or your computer fan or something. It sounds like you're sitting in one of these wind tunnels.
No, I don't know how I can fix that.
That's okay. It's okay, because when you talk, it kind of drowns it out. But
What
before
I
the
need to
break,
do, I need to soundproof my office here so that it can be a little more
that's
conducive.
what it is, yes. And then before the break, you took us up to the point at the TNT works,
Yes.
where we were on the road and the thing happened. So talk to us, man. Take it away.
The night of November 15th, the Scarberries and the Millettes were there at the TNT area, and they were hot rodding, drag racing, and at the side of the North Power Plant, their headlights caught something with a wing trapped on a ground wire. And Linda is the one who made the description. All four went on record and reported to the police that night. But what saw them scared them so much that they immediately got back on the road leading back to Point Pleasant, and they drove in excess of 100 miles an hour, just 10 miles away, back to Point Pleasant, while being chased by what they saw. Now, what they saw, according to Linda, and I had her in the documentary, we took her back to the site of the North Power Plant, and we interviewed her there where this occurred. And what Linda saw, in her own words, again, what I wanted for the documentary, was a tall, slender, yet muscular man, 7 to 9 feet tall, with glowing red eyes and what she described as looking like angel wings protruding from his back. So that is the first sighting, and that is the description. That's the official description of Mothman in the police records. Keel references it, Walton references it. All of the imagery that has been produced in comics and in cartoons, and even the statue in Point Pleasant, and even the CGI that we created for the documentary film, doesn't really reflect the eyewitness accounts. It's been taken more, it's become more caricaturized, and it's gone a more comic book direction than what they saw. And so to interview Linda, and I interviewed her in 2002, I believe. 2001, 2002. So a good sighting was in 66. So you're talking a good 40-some years. I'm not good with math. I'm not good at mapping, Kev. I'm trying to figure 66 to 2002, so 96 within 30. So yeah, you're talking about 45 years. And this woman was still terrified. She would shake, she would tear up when she was talking about it. Roger, her husband, has never gone on record other than the police report from 1966. We tried for many years to get Roger to sit down with us so we could film his interview. We even promised to give him the cassette, the video cassette when we left, so that he had the footage and he could choose to do with it what he wanted at the time of his death, but he refused to sit down and talk. And as to my knowledge, he has never gone on record after that initial reporting to the police in Point Pleasant.
You know,
So
you think about Linda and her response, that almost like being back in the moment, literally still a very, very vivid memory. Roger there, yeah, Roger. That for me is more interesting than people that want to tell their story on channels like mine on YouTube and everywhere else.
Hey, watch it.
No, you know what I mean, though, when somebody witnesses something, you know, the fact that if they're not willing to talk about it, it almost adds another level of credibility to the fact they definitely seen something, you know?
It did. And see, that was the part of the process. People say, why did it take 6 years? Well, part of it was we were funding it ourselves. Part of it was we were doing the documentary film in our spare time while each of us were also working um, regular jobs. And then the other part of it was actually getting these individuals, these eyewitnesses, to agree to talk about their experiences. And it took a lot of coaxing. It took a lot of getting to know them. It took a lot of becoming friendly with them first, and building their trust, and then slowly getting them back to the point of telling their story. And I will say this one thing, because I've been asked several times when we did the documentary film, did we ever pay anyone for their story? Did we ever reimburse them? The answer to that is no, we did not. Not one single eyewitness received any type of financial reimbursement. And I made it very clear when we were doing the film that if word ever got out that they had been reimbursed or they had been paid to be part of the documentary film, it sullies and tarnishes the objectivity and the integrity of the journalistic approach that we were taking to this film. So every eyewitness in here, they did it out because they were willing to go on record. Like I said, it did take some relationship building to get them to do that.
So Travis, let me take you back to that, because I can imagine, having to get to know the person, win their trust. And Linda herself, I mean, if I can ask you, did she take you back to actually being in the car? I mean, what was that like? I mean, you said they were driving at 100 miles per hour, but I mean, what were the people saying in the car when this was happening?
Linda's testimony is they were just scared. They were under the age of 21. So these were 17, 18, 19-year-old kids at the time. All good students. Their history up to this point, they were not habitual drug users. They weren't drinking. They weren't doing anything that they shouldn't have been doing except drag racing.
As you do. Hey, I've been there when I was younger.
Yeah.
Boy racing and that. We've all done it.
Exactly. And a 57 Chevy, who's not going to want to?
Nice.
I mean, that's my ideal dream car. If I ever get rich enough to start collecting, the very first thing I'm getting.
You see, you've got real Chevy. Cars over there. Over here, we've got like machines that are powered by hair dryers. They're kind of like cars. You know.
It's true. The one thing America's got going for it, we did have that for a while.
Everything bigger, dude. You guys do everything bigger.
This is true. We go big or go home. So
now, back in the car again. I hate to use this word because it can be taken the wrong way. But I would imagine being that age, being in the middle of something like this, it would have literally been hysterical. And I hate using that word because people will say, well, hysteria is what's probably kicked in. They've probably seen an owl or something, and then it's kind of, they've hyped it up. And I don't think so, because there's way more to this than just this one account,
There is. When we got to researching what took place over those 13 months, there were over 100 eyewitness accounts seeing the same thing across multiple counties in West Virginia. And the people that were eyewitness reports were doctors, teachers, police officers, lawyers. These were upstanding, respectable adults for the most part. You had a few of the instances with the older teenagers, but most of them were adults. Most of them were terrified when they came into contact with seeing this entity. And so you start looking at, and again, it's kind of like, I'm assuming, the area that ironically that I'm from in Virginia and where Point Pleasant is and everything, it's very similar to the landscape of Ireland and Scotland, and that's why the majority of the settlers who settled here were Scots Irish. My family is Scots Irish. It's a very similar type of terrain and layout. So you're talking about counties and towns that were separated by miles. There were no major telephone carriers providing telephones in Point Pleasant at the time. You didn't have cable news. You had radio, but you don't get instant stories going out over the radio. Even then, you did not in such a way that multiple reports were coming in different areas at the same time. So it's not that these people even necessarily talked to their neighbors about what they were seeing, but they were all seeing the same thing.
And when you were talking to Linda, you know, this might seem a weird thing to ask, but how was Roger about her? How was he about her sharing this? You know, was he uncomfortable? Did he kind of leave her, like leave you to it?
They, Roger and Linda divorced several years ago. And that was one of the negative side effects for her, was what it did to her marriage. And that was one of the other interesting things, talking to the eyewitnesses, is the negative impact these sightings had on their lives. Individuals that had never had a problem with drugs and alcohol ended up having chemical addictions. Marriages would end.
That in itself is, I mean, that in itself is something that should be noted. You know, the kind of ramifications, the ripples that this sent through people's lives, you know?
Yes, and that was one of the things that we really wanted to look at, was how did this event impact the town and the residents? And that's, you know, there are instances where things like, for example, you have Roswell, the Roswell incident in the U.S. in 1947. Well, there's all this talk about the government conspiracy and the crash and the cover-up, but what did it do to the people? What did it do to Jesse Marcel and his family? What did it do to the sheriff? What did it do to Mac Brazel? What did it do to those individuals? And those are the stories that often don't get told. Same thing in Point Pleasant, same thing in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. These places where these events occur, too often the event overshadows the ramifications and the impact. And we wanted to bring back to the Mothman story the humanity.
You know, just thinking about what you said there, I've been guilty of that myself. We all have. These kind of stories, I call it infotainment.
Exactly.
It's not divisive. It's not, you know, touching on any of the hot kind of topics that trigger people or anything. So people like to listen to this stuff, the X-Files, the woo-woo, or the woo as I call it. But very rarely, and as somebody who's purely a host, I don't call myself even a researcher. I use Google. Anyone can use Google. A monkey can use Google. So I don't call myself a researcher. But you know, very rarely does somebody like myself really consider that human element. You know, the people at the center of these stories, be it the Mothman, be it any of the stories we talk about, you know, something that is forgotten in amongst it.
It is. It's forgotten. It's swept away because that's not sensational. And you know, I don't consider myself a paranormal investigator. I do consider myself a paranormal researcher because I do like understanding, or trying to understand, what is going on in a grand scheme when it comes to the natural, the supernatural, the normal, and the paranormal. And as we've talked on Warrior Mode, I think the line there is blurring on a daily basis between the supernatural and the natural, and the normal, and paranormal. But I think getting back to the heart of these stories, the people, the eyewitnesses, how did it impact them? How are they changed? And then looking at the town and how it changed the town, how it changed the geographic footprint of the town, how it changed the economic development of the town, how it changed the future of the town, and also the divided line that was there between those who believe it and those who say it's a hoax. So there were all these different elements, and like I said, you know, the documentary film started out over 4 hours, and the plan was to make a series of documentary films exploring each of these components, including the spiritual, religious, and cultural implications of winged entities as they appear throughout history and throughout cultures even to this day.
And we were talking during the last break, Travis, about the history of this place, because you mentioned that you can almost triangulate the woo, right? It's like the Bermuda Triangle, and I mentioned Loch Ness and the Highlands, and like Scotland, where you said a lot of the people come from, you've had a lot of battles up in the Highlands, you've had a lot of bloodshed. a lot of things I think contribute to it being a hotspot, and some of the things in West Virginia as well. They definitely contribute to this whole picture, I think.
They do. One of the things that was very interesting for us as we started researching is that Point Pleasant had originally been Camp Point Pleasant. It was an outpost as there was a westward migration from, at that time, what was Virginia, moving into an area that had not been named necessarily. And it was the site of a very specific battle, Lord Dunmore's War. And Lord Dunmore was in actuality Virginia Governor John Murray. John Murray, the Lord of Dunmore, was his official title. And he was trying to stop the westward migration. And there was a huge conflict with the Native American tribes. One of those tribes was led by Chief Cornstalk. And there was multiple battles, multiple deaths leading up to this. And actually, Lord Dunmore's War has now been classified by the Daughters of the American Revolution as the first battle in the battle for American Revolution. So it is considered kind of the impetus for what would eventually become the War for Independence.
Lord Dunmore is looking very, very Scottish.
He does. Have you seen him? Did you see him?
Yeah, I've got him here. I forgot to share screens with you, brother. I apologise.
Oh, you're fine.
You can't see what I'm seeing, but yeah, he looks highly Scottish here.
Very, very, very Highland Scottish.
Yeah, he's got the right genetics for it. He's got that cracking, really peely-wally skin, as we call it. He's got the ginger kind of hair. He's got the kilt on. He's looking good. He better not have boxer shorts on under there. That's all I'm saying. You know?
That's a definite no-no.
A definite no-no.
So you had all of this going on, and of course, it was in this battle that Chief Cornstalk and his son are killed. Now, there's two stories from the historical narrative. One says Cornstalk and his son were fighting with the settlers against a more aggressive Native American tribe, and then the other version is that Cornstalk was actually leading the fight against the settlers. But regardless of which of those accounts is true, what does hold true is that Cornstalk died, and both accounts have him uttering a curse on the area and on the land so that they would never find peace and never be at rest. And if you look at the historic timeline, and we do this in the documentary, we break down and look at everything that took place as far as we could find historically. I'm going to give you a real quick history lesson. This is done more in depth in the film. But of course, you had Lord Dunmore's War, you had the death of Cornstalk and many of his tribe, uttering a curse so the area would not find peace. 1907, there was a coal mine disaster, killed 310 coal miners. 1944, 150 people killed when a tornado ripped through the area. 1967, the collapse of the bridge. 1968, 35 people killed when Piedmont Airlines plane crashes near the Kanawha Airport. 1970, November 14th, 75 people killed when Southern Airways DC-10 crashes into a mountain. 1976, it was rocked in the middle of the night with an explosion at the Mason County Jail. Housed in the jail was a woman named Harriet Sisk, who had been arrested for the murder of her infant daughter. On March 2nd, her husband came to jail with a suitcase full of explosives to kill himself and his wife. He sat the suitcase down, pulled out a shotgun, shot the suitcase, killed himself, his wife, and 3 law enforcement officers.
Get out of here, come on.
Interesting note is that the Mason County Jail was the original burial site for Chief Cornstalk's remains. They had been moved to Columbia Park. 1978, a freight train derails in Point Pleasant, dumping thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals. They contaminated the town's water supply, and the wells had to be abandoned. 1978, April, tragedy struck again. The town of St. Mary's, north of Point Pleasant, when 51 men working on the Willow Island power plant were killed when the construction scaffolding collapsed. All of this is taking place in an area, like I said, the town of Point Pleasant has 5,000 people.
That's bizarre. Nobody should move there. If you're looking for property, I'm sorry, but don't go anywhere near there. You know?
The interesting thing for us, very startling, is that on September 11th, 2001, FAA flight path data shows that Flight 77, which was the airplane that the terrorists flew into the Pentagon, was hijacked directly over Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where it had made an abrupt turn and change in trajectory and flew into the Pentagon.
Now, I've
So
heard that there's been Mothman sightings on 9/11.
there's a photograph that has surfaced several years ago. We looked at it. That does seem to show a flying humanoid flying between the towers shortly before the first tower was hit.
Now, when it comes to the Mothman as well, 1967, I think you referenced there for when the bridge came down, right?
Bridge collapse on December
I've heard
15th.
various reports. Some say that the Mothman was seen on the bridge, some say it wasn't. What did you turn up when you looked into that aspect of it?
Same thing. There were accounts that he had been seen. There were also accounts that the day before there were very prominent men in black type characters, black suits, fedoras, sunglasses, that had been seen around the bridge, underneath of it, as if they were inspecting, as if they were looking at something. And then the day that the bridge collapsed, there is also the reports of what today we would call a sonic boom, that there was a massive explosion-like sound, and at that point, that's when the bridge began to wobble and weave and wave and undulate, and then eventually broke and dumped those cars and those 46 people into the Ohio River.
Wow. Now, other witnesses that you spoke to, we've got the car sighting. Who else did you speak to, Travis, when it came to this case?
Well, we talked to several of the individuals that have become prominent individuals as far as experts on the topic. We had Charlie Humphreys, who was a historian. We interviewed several DAR individuals from a historical standpoint about what they had seen. Jeff Walmsley was growing up in the area at the time. Of course, we did talk with Linda Scarberry. We talked with her children about how it had impacted them. We had interviewed several. There were some that were interviewed that did not want to be included. For example, Carolyn Harris, who owned the Harris Steakhouse and Diner on Main Street in Point Pleasant. She was one of the individuals that was prominently involved in getting the Mothman Festival started in Point Pleasant in 2001. And we would talk to her and interview her, and she would tell us her story. But her story she did not want to capitalize or make public, because her son and her husband were actually two of the deaths on the bridge when it collapsed that day in 1967.
Oh, wow. Not so good. Yeah. Not so good.
No.
No.
And unfortunately, we lost Carolyn a couple of years ago. Linda Scarberry died in 2011. And just to kind of show the relationship that we had developed, when Linda died, the morning of her death, her daughter and son-in-law called me at about 8 o'clock that morning to let me know if they would keep me apprised of arrangements and what was going to be done and things like that. But that was the type of relationships that we tried very hard to develop. We interviewed Faye DeWitt. She was an original eyewitness. Her family, according to her account, was supposed to be on the bridge, but she said she had such a feeling of impending doom and dread that she convinced them to stay home that night and not go out. So there's all of these very interesting elements that kind of come into play when you start talking to the eyewitnesses. Those that will tell their story and will do it on record, those that will talk to you about it. That was one of the things, we have kind of skirted and addressed the issue of the government facility, the TNT, when we were talking with Denny Bellamy, who was the director of tourism there, and he introduced us to some older individuals who had worked building this facility. When you hear how this facility was built, it sounds eerily like the construction of Area 51. The individuals were picked up at a bus terminal in a school bus with blacked out windows. They were driven to the McClintock Wildlife Preserve, where they were taken into a garage. Everyone exited the bus. They got out of their civilian clothes, put on their work uniforms, got back on the bus, and then they were shipped out into the McClintock Wildlife Preserve, the West Virginia Ordnance Works. They were shipped out to different places where they would work, pull their 8-10 hour day. They would be picked up, they would be brought back to the garage, change their clothes, taken home. They had no idea where they had been. They had no idea what part of the facility they were working on, what part they were constructing. And then according to those individuals, and according to Denny Bellamy, that group of government engineers also had overseen construction of Oak Ridge Power in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Groom Lake, Area 51 in Nevada.
Very interesting. Now hold that
Yes.
thought. We're going to come back on these bases and these constructions and the weirdness around their building after the break with Travis Short. Now don't go anywhere, folks, because 1 hour down, 1 hour to go right here at the home of the Kev Baker Show, Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. I'm going to get Travis's thoughts on the Men in Black aspect, UFOs and more. Don't go anywhere. Hour number 2 on today's Kev Baker Show. The audio is sorted. We're all good to go. Before we go anywhere, if I may, just take a moment to mention yesterday's show with Kevin Nacy. He was talking about something called Roll for US. He wants to let me tell all of you about the website that is now live. It's called www.roll4 us.com. That's roll4us.com. Head on over there, check that out, and show my brother some support. Share it far and wide, and tell everyone on anti-social media if they do just one thing apart from listening to TFR, if they go to that website as well. So with that said, let me get back to Travis Short, and we're going to get back into the weirdness around the base, the kind of facility that is at the center of Point Pleasant Woo. But before we do that, Travis, is there any social media links, anything, websites you want to give out to the audience?
Just my personal Facebook page. They can find me. It's R. Travis Short. There's 2 T's in short. They can find me on Twitter and also on Instagram. And on Facebook also there's
Are you on
Phoenix Publicity.
Instagram, man?
I'm on Instagram.
Dang, dude. I didn't take that one up. I don't know. I'm getting set in my ways. I'm a Facebook guy, but I ditched that. I've got a love-hate relationship. I like playing about on Twitter. Oh, sorry, Twitter. Yeah.
Well, part of my roles with the radio stations that I manage is we have to have a very active social media presence. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. I have a Snapchat that I don't use because it's the way that my son and daughter, who are teenagers, that's the way they prefer to interact with me, is to send snaps.
Yeah.
And so those, I don't do a lot with Snapchat. Instagram, I do a lot with professionally. I try to do the same thing with Twitter and Facebook. I did Pinterest for a while, and that one it never did anything for me. I never really.
What a guy!
Really got. I'm all over the place.
You're viral. I'm telling you. So listen, let's get back to where we left off before the break, because I think this is definitely key to the story as well. You've got this kind of government facility. You've got real weirdness around the construction of it. It sounds like something like a James Bond movie. Are we maybe talking about underground levels going on here? Various kind of facilities and roles, perhaps?
Well, I think that is something that we were definitely leaning towards that for another segment of the documentary, was how do these things actually interconnect? One of the things, the TNT area where this facility was built, and we went, and there are shots in the documentary film of some of the structures that have been literally overtaken by nature. Some of the original buildings, the North Power Plant and South Power Plant were demolished in the 90s, but there are still, there's acid vats, there's some of the igloos are still there. We've been in several of the igloos, the ones that are empty. Unfortunately, they've really started encouraging people to not go out there because in 2010, one of those igloos exploded because it still does have chemicals such as TNT and other explosives in it, and if something set it off and it did explode. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was either right before or right after the Mothman Festival in 2010. But we were looking at, is there a connection here between these three secret government installations? Is Mothman possibly the offshoot, the I don't want to say offspring, but maybe that might even be a term to go with. But is Mothman somehow related to it being a government facility? Does it have to do with it being World War II? We talked, I think it was in Warrior Mode when we were discussing Mothman that one night. L.A. Marzulli, who is an expert in fallen angels and Nephilim and UFOs, and was in the first season of Ancient Aliens, good friend of mine, former client that I worked with.
I love L.A. He's been on here
great.
many times. What a character, man.
Oh, he's great. I love him to death.
The Giant of Kandahar. That's my favorite L.A. Marzulli woo.
Yes. Yep. He's awesome. He really is. A very, very well versed, very well knowledgeable in what he's doing. He has an entire DVD series, the Watchers series, highly recommended. It's Ancient Aliens, but with more of a theological and spiritual slant. But he and I were discussing the fact that Mothman, while there were no sightings of Mothman during World War II, it's interesting that there's a distinct connection by almost 20 years. The end of World War II, the UFO crash at Roswell, all these things that were taking place. And, is it possible, because Marzulli did have a theory that government entities have in the past made, and Bill Bean falls into this category as well, have made pacts, have entered into agreements with otherworldly entities such as fallen angels, demons, extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, whatever.
You look at, sorry to interrupt, but I think it kind of adds to this. You look at Jack Parsons,
Yes.
JPL, a Crowleyite, and literally trying to open portals in the desert.
Yes.
So it's not way out fiction in my book. I think it is definitely relevant.
I think it has to be examined, and I think then, was something done, did something take place there at the TNT area that opened a portal, allowing this entity that we now call Mothman, it allowed it to manifest and to interact in Point Pleasant for a period of time, there 13 months, until the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which at the time was one of the greatest civil engineering disasters in U.S. history. 46 people lost their lives. 2 bodies were never found. It economically changed Point Pleasant, because what was a 2-mile drive from Point Pleasant across the bridge to Gallipolis, Ohio, now was a 20-mile drive one way. You had to go 10 miles up the river, 10 miles down. So to go to a store or to go to a restaurant, you're talking a 40-mile round trip drive.
And what was the bridge collapse attributed to?
Well, everything from the Curse of Cornstalk to Mothman.
What was the actual, scientific, what was the official kind of story?
Well, the bridge had been constructed in 1928, so it was about 40 years old at the time that it collapsed. And it was very unique at the time. It was a suspension bridge, a high-tension I-bar chain, and a unique anchorage system. Had rocker towers, 130-foot towers, that allowed the bridge to move at shifting changes in chain length. It was the first I-bar suspension bridge ever constructed in the U.S. At the end of the bridge, there were 2 stoplights on either end. And at approximately 5 o'clock on December 15th of '67, those stoplights malfunctioned, stayed red the entire time, keeping the cars on the bridge at the point that the bridge collapsed, all 2,235 feet of it. And so the official report is that there was a fracture in one of the I-bars. It was literally from the probably from the point of construction when it left the manufacturer. And 40 years of cars going and coming, and the shaking, and the pressure that was put on this one tiny rod is what eventually led to the actual collapse of the bridge. It was actually called a cleavage fracture, and it was an I-bar 330 at joint C13N. And I'm actually referring back to my script now when we were doing the narration of this. The official report states the fracture was caused due to stress corrosion and corrosion fatigue, which then caused the fracture to gradually enlarge over time, causing a failure of the entire structure.
So, I mean, not too far-fetched, or it wasn't a swamp gas explanation. But of course, it won't take away the fact that this was all in amongst the time of the Mothman.
Yes.
Again, my mind's still going back to the kind of the TNT plant, what they might have been doing there. We mentioned during one of the breaks, TV show Stranger Things, right?
One of my favorites right now. I love that show.
It's awesome. I think season 3 or whatever one we're on.
We're up to season 4.
Yeah, it'll be coming soon.
Premiere, yeah.
Yeah, can't wait for that. But I mean, it talks about a government facility, a portal to the upside down, things coming into our realm. You know, I don't know if it's confirmation bias because of that show and because of what I'm hearing here with the base and everything else, and what I know about Montauk and various other stories, but it seems to me this is very, very relevant. All of the whole kind of government sneaky beaky, what's going on there. And to back that up, or maybe to add to that, you've got this weird phenomenon of men in black, and we're not just talking government men in black like goons from the FBI or something. This is like the weirdest stuff I've ever come across. This is what caused me to become what I call a Keelian and re-listen to the book, because some of the stories are about the visits that people were experiencing after witnessing stuff. It's beyond supernatural, it's beyond weird, it's some of the weirdest stuff I've ever heard. So Travis, what's your take on that element? Because it could be linked again to the facility, right?
It very well could be. Again, you know, Keel and the residents of Point Pleasant dealt with the Men in Black phenomena quite a bit, and it was very interesting. Some things that actually surfaced with this particular group of Men in Black, and that includes they had a huge hatred of religious iconography to the point that Keel encouraged Linda Scarberry and there were 4 girls that became pregnant at the same time in Point Pleasant. And that's a totally different kind of conspiracy that we could go into there. But he told them that in order to ward off the intrusion, these Men in Black, that they needed to have crucifixes in their homes, and that those crucifixes needed to have gold in them in order to ward off the appearance of these unwelcomed Men in Black.
No, wait a minute, Travis. Right, wait a minute. Men in Black is on the side now. 4 mysterious pregnancies. Come on, dude. You can't just throw that out to Kev Baker and not have me bite.
Well, I'm not saying that they were mysterious.
Okay. But timely. Well, and were they all together? What happened?
Timing. They were all pregnant roughly at the same time. And Scarberry points out in one of her interviews that all of the children that were born seemed to have, and I'm quoting Linda Scarberry, and this is not what we got into in the documentary. This was other interviews, that all the children seemed to have heightened intelligence.
Whoa. So for lack of a better term, like indigo children, you would say?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah. So, you know, very, like I said, it's just very interesting things that were taking place with these Men in Black.
And Keel tells these people then, if these Men in Black come calling, like Bill Bain would say, your best defense is something to do with Jesus, right?
Well, yeah, and one of the things that Linda said was that, and this I'm quoting from her interview, all of us girls kept crucifixes around our babies' beds or close to them. The men in black tried to kidnap one of the girls' babies in New Haven, West Virginia. End quote.
They tried to kidnap one of the babies?
They tried to kidnap one of the babies.
Right. What on Earth's name? Or what beyond Earth's name is going on there?
The exact quote from Linda, and this is not from our interview, this is from the book that she was interviewed with Jeff Walmsley and Donnie Sturgeon. Quote, for some reason, the men in black were afraid of a crucifix. Mr. Keel said there had to be gold on the crucifix. All of us girls kept crucifixes about the babies' beds or close to them. The men in black tried to kidnap one of the girls' babies in New Haven, West Virginia, end quote.
Wow. Wow.
And in a related story, Scarberry goes on to detail a late-night visit for men in black that disappeared upon seeing the crucifix. And actually, in the in-depth version of that interview, what she did was she saw something out of the corner of her eye, and she went to light a candle. And when she struck the match, it caught in the gold on the crucifix. The MIB, the shadow figure, saw that and immediately vaporized and vanished. Yes.
That is pure Travis Short. Oh, you are taking the woo to deeper depths, my friend. But let's stick on the men in black. I mean, what did you get told about the visits away from John Keel? I mean, what did you learn when you looked into this aspect of it?
The only eyewitness that we talked to that had direct MIB stories were John Keel and Linda Scarberry.
Okay.
And so, you know, I recounted what Scarberry had already told Jeff and Donnie, and then she just basically reconfirmed that.
I can't believe this, man. You spoke to John Keel about Men in Black.
I did, and he was... Even you know, in 2001, 2002, that man was still very, very super. He was heightened sense of paranoia. It took multiple attempts by Jeff Walmsley to set the interviews up, and Keel had to call us. We could only talk for a certain period of time, then he would call back. He was very, very careful and cautious.
Wow, dude, wow. Now, so what did he say to you then about the Men in Black? What was his kind of headline takeaway about them? What did he make in the end of what it was all about?
You know, his take was, again, with Mothman, you know, it was slightly different than what most people have. You know, he wasn't so sure that the MIBs were government operatives as much as they were operatives of something more sinister and nefarious and supernatural. He describes them very, very interestingly in his interviews and in the book. He talks about them being almost a Middle Eastern physical description, very thin, elongated, gaunt, but that their skin had an almost translucent and almost jellyfish-like appearance, that you could see the veins under the skin too clearly.
You know, I think J.J. Abrams must have gone for that as the archetype for. I don't know if you've seen the show Fringe and The Observers.
No, I haven't actually.
There's it's weirdness. It's all like crazy, weird woo stuff that's just out of the ordinary, and you get these. It's called The Observers, and one of them's called August. They're all named after months of the year, but very gaunt, very, very peely-wally, very like what you're describing, and definitely not your typical human, air quotes.
Exactly, and Keel does, you know, address that. One of the things that Keel said, and it was always very interesting, was that the Men in Black were, they often had elongated fingers. Sometimes they would have 6 digits instead of 5. And then he said another interesting aspect, they would seem to be preoccupied with time. They would make statements like, "We will see you in time," or they would ask questions about what time it was in reference to what day, what year, what month, as if they were out of place and out of time. Or if they were anticipating a specific date and time.
You know, again, I'm probably letting fringe confirmation bias steer me here, but it's I'd be an idiot not to point out the fact that these entities, that's all I'm going to call them, like the TV show Fringe, they appear in and around weirdness, like Mothman, like things that are just out of the ordinary. And is there some time aspect to them? It feels like it. Some of the reports I've heard. Some of the reports I've heard, they've kind of turned up with recording equipment, but then not knowing how to use it. Some of them
not knowing how to use telephones, not knowing how. Yes.
And they're weird around food and drink as well, if I remember rightly, right?
Yes, they weird about what they would eat, what they would drink. Things such as simple as ink pens, ballpoint pens would fascinate them. They would want to take them. Toasters, very, very, very basic.
I mean, that sounds like somebody not from this world, whether it's dimensional or alien. It's not from here,
or not from this time.
Yeah,
maybe not from So a lot of what I love about what researching and conversations like this, you start having this dialogue, and then more questions than answers come up. You really start looking at it almost like a Rubik's Cube, and everything is out of place, and it takes looking at it and twisting it the right way to see the entire picture, to get all of the panels to line up. But there's so many different perspectives of Mothman and the Men in Black and what was going on in Point Pleasant.
And you got really UFOs as well, right? UFOs too.
Yeah.
So what were some of the UFO stuff that was going on at the time?
Many eyewitness accounts throughout the Ohio River at the time of UFO sightings. Denny Bellamy, the director of tourism there, even had his own eyewitness account of one of the typical black triangular shape with three-point light UFOs that just hovered over the Ohio River one night and then shot off in the distance. But that's actually what brought kill to Point Pleasant. It wasn't the Mothman, it was UFO sightings that were being reported throughout the country, or reported in the country throughout the Ohio Valley region. That's what brought kill to Point Pleasant. And then all of the other high strangeness, the term that we use a lot on this show, all that other high strangeness really prompted him to stay and keep coming back and keep coming back. And then I mentioned there was the whole Indrid Cold, and several other entities that had manifested themselves in another part of West Virginia at around the same time.
Well, talk to us about that one, Travis, before we go to the break. The coal incident you just kind of mentioned there.
You've got, and coal makes an appearance in the Mothman Prophecies movie. That's actually, they kind of combine Mothman and Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold was actually an entity that appeared to Woodrow Derenberger in Mineral Springs, West Virginia. But there were actually other entities at the same time. Indrid Cold was one, Demos was another, Athol was another, and Princess Leia was another. And again, remember, this was before Star Wars, but she called herself Princess Leia. They all were appearing in the town. They were making prophecies. There were prophecies of plane crash, the prophecy of the Pope being knifed to death. There was a prophecy about the Antichrist coming out of Israel in the next several months. They prophesied about the RFK assassination and the December 15th tragedy in Point Pleasant. All of these things were taking place by these really weird entities that were manifesting themselves actually east of Point Pleasant.
Oh man, why is it taking so long for me to get you on the show? I am sitting here like a child. I am like a child on Christmas morning. This is like, dude, we have gone into some real deep stuff tonight, and we've still got a segment to go. And I believe Dark Wings, we need to talk about that, right? Because you mentioned earlier on in the show, we've got something big to announce on that. Now, we'll get to that. People, you need to stay tuned. We'll get to that right after the break.
This will be the first big announcement about this, so you're getting the scoop.
Awesome, awesome. Now, Loch Ness, it's home to the monster and me. Point Pleasant, you've got the Mothman. You've got these places around the world. Bermuda Triangle, the Alaskan Triangle, the Devil's Triangle. You've got these places, Travis, where it seems it's almost like nexus points between this world and other worlds. And Point Pleasant, we've barely scratched the surface in reality. You can't, I mean, it's hard to ignore the plethora of things that go on there, man.
Oh, it was a hotbed. Point Pleasant was the location that I had my first real experience in a location that was truly haunted. So much so that there was physical activity during the daytime. Drops in temperature, doors opening and closing by themselves, footsteps, laughter, disembodied voices, all.
Uh-huh.
So it's a hotbed of activity.
There we go. I think we kind of lagged out a little second there on the Skype. Yes, I'll sync up during the break with Travis. We'll catch up. Yes, we'll catch up with each other. I think it's happened now. But yeah, again, for anyone out there, I hope you're really enjoying this. Follow Travis over on Facebook and over on Twitter as well. And before we go to the break, I mean, how's Tia doing? Our good friend Tia Bell.
She's doing well. She and I keep trying to connect and have a phone conversation, but schedules are not permitting right now. But she's great.
She's lovely, right? And yet, I tell you what, dude.
She is.
She was one of the most contriversial guests I've ever had on my show, and I still don't get it.
I can't imagine.
I don't get it. I don't get it.
She's just she's very, very upfront. And she's very forward. She's very forward.
Yep.
And a lot of people do not like that. But I can say she keeps promising me she's going to fly down and see me, and I really want her to. I want her to come down, trying to book an event once we're able to do so.
Tia is awesome. Travis Short is here with me, and how we have crammed so much woo into 3 segments of this show is beyond me. I can't thank you enough, Travis. It's everything I thought it would be.
I have enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, we're like a pair of star-crossed lovers here.
I know, right?
Talking the woo in a totally, purely toxic heterosexual way, because that's how I roll. But again, I can't thank you enough for taking us into this deep dive on the Mothman. We could probably talk about this for another 10 hours, right? But this is all building up to the fact that you've mentioned something here a couple of times, Dark Wings. Talk to us about the big news you've got with what's coming up.
Big news. For several years, we released Dark Wings, the documentary, in September of 2009. We premiered it at the Mothman Festival. We were only supposed to do one showing. We ended up having to do, I think there were 5 showings that weekend. 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. It might have only been 4, but I know there was at least 4, if not 5. Things happen. And one of the things I enjoyed about the interview with Liberty on Sunday night was him talking about his falling out with Billy Joel and how that they had reconnected and they were, friendly again and things like that. Well, something had happened after the release of the Dark Wings documentary film, and there was a personal issue between myself and Charlie McCracken, the director, and it was a personal falling out. And when that happened, we kind of made the decision we were just pulling everything that we had done as a joint venture. So Dark Wings kind of got was taken out of mainstream media. You couldn't buy it anywhere. There were no, it had never been uploaded to any platforms. You couldn't stream it. There was nothing like that. Well, he and I reconnected in 2017, 2018, and kind of were able to make amends to some degree in our relationship. But unfortunately, Charlie passed away last July, July 17th, July 18th, it was shortly after midnight in 2019. He passed away, and one of the things that I've been trying to do, and finally have been able to do that, is get Dark Wings back and re-release the original cut, which was released in 2009, which I now have both working copies of that DVD, but I also have the original raw data. And so the second mission was to produce a re-release of Dark Wings, which would include archival footage of the shoot, behind the scenes, some of the stuff that we did at Lincoln State Mental Hospital, which I was alluding to before the commercial break. Very, very paranormal, active hotspot. And then even there's a mini documentary, it was a mockumentary that we did at Area 51, where it's actually on YouTube. It's the cows of Area 51. We actually interview cows about cattle mutilations, which I know, Kev, but it's insane, but we did it.
No, that's brilliant. It's genius. I love it.
And it's had like almost 10,000 views on YouTube. But I want to put that on the documentary. Photographs, behind the scenes photographs of Charlie. And then, as you know, I took my daughter turned 16.
Oh, big shout out to her, by the way. She was absolutely awesome when she came on the show.
We need to get her back on. Get her on this one, because she could even, you guys would have a blast talking in circles, because she's big into the paranormal and the supernatural and conspiracies and things like that. But so for her birthday, what she wanted was for me to take her and 3 of her friends to Point Pleasant and to kind of retrace the steps. So I took them for 2 days. And so I shot, of course, there's photos, behind the scenes photos of that.
I bet you were full of pride. I mean, your child asking you for her birthday to go there. It must have been awesome.
It was. And she's just so into it. And her friends were into it. And they had a blast. But I also shot some video there. And for example, when you watch the original 2009 documentary, the opening scene, which is me talking to the camera, is shot at the amphitheater. That's not the original way it was shot. We actually shot it at the convergence of the Ohio and the Kanawha River, which is another end of town. So I actually reshot that as kind of this is how it would have looked if I were, 20 years older and we had actually shot it. But this was the location. This is how we wanted the documentary to start. But this is the direction that we chose to go, and this is why we made that choice. And then I took Leah and her friends to the North Power Plant, where I interviewed Linda Scarberry, and I let them just kind of talk about what each of their theories was about Mothman. So my plan is now to move forward in the next several months, re-releasing the 2009 cut, launching a website where the DVD can be ordered, and then moving. The third phase is doing a commemorative re-release that is done in memory of Charlie McCracken and his life and his work, and be able to focus on him, and maybe even have myself and some of the other individuals that were involved with the production talk about him, and just do kind of a memorial service. So that's kind of what I've been doing. So the big component, though, was getting access to the actual film again, and then also the raw data, which I now have. So for the first time publicly, I'm announcing on Kev Baker's show that Dark Wings, the Mothman Chronicle, will be available for purchase very soon, and there will also be a new cut of the DVD with an added bonus material behind the scenes from the original shoot, as well as things that are the most recent trip that I took this past July, and then, as I mentioned, the mockumentary, The Cows of Area 51. So very excited about putting that together and making that available to individuals as well.
Oh, that is awesome. Awesome, Travis. And obviously, nearer the time, will I get you back on to talk about the release of it coming out, and so many other topics that we could talk about here. And you mentioned my kind of home monster, the Loch Ness Monster. You mentioned how that was really kind of pivotal for you when you were growing up. I mean, what's your take on what's going on there?
Well, let me ask you, have there been any recent sightings?
There have. There's more sightings now that they've got live webcams up on the loch.
Okay.
Yeah. Now there, admittedly, there's been another couple of sightings where it was so easy to debunk it was unreal. Okay, but there has been one of the more interesting sightings, in my opinion, has come from the actual webcams that look out onto the loch. But because you're so far away, and knowing that road, driving up and down at Inverness, it can be hard to distinguish what may be leaving a wake in the water, because it's a mile across at some points, right? So,
Right.
grainy webcam, looking way out into the distance, you see some wake in the water. It's how your mind's eye interprets it, right? So,
Right.
if you want to see a monster, you'll
You're
see a
going to see them.
monster. Yeah, but what's your take on it?
I've always been fascinated. Part of me really wants the Loch Ness Monster to be a remnant of the dinosaur era. I really do.
Yeah, the
I want,
whole kind of plesiosaur
yes,
theory.
I,
Yeah.
I really want that. If I had, if I could root for what the Loch Ness Monster
Yep.
is, that would be my take.
Growing up, that was really, if you spoke to me as a child, that's what I was. I thought it was something like that,
uh, I was always fascinated by it. There was the story of Mokele Mbembe, the dinosaur in the jungles of Africa, the beast that could stop the flow of a river. And Disney, there were stories about it, and Disney came and did a movie in the '80s, Baby: Secret of the Lost Legend. I was always fascinated by that. I have to ask. I mean, I'm going to yield to the Scotsman. What's your take on Loch Ness? Because we've never had this conversation. We've never discussed Loch Ness and what you think about it.
when I was younger, like I said, I tried to look more for a scientific kind of answer to it. Growing up there, it's a village of 800 people in Fort Augustus, right? And we're right at the very southern mouth of it. So skeptics would say that because of tourism, there's a real kind of a need for the story to stay alive, right? And I get that, I do get that, but I think the Loch Ness Monster, obviously people go and look at that. They don't appreciate that, like Point Pleasant, it might have that one focal kind of event, cryptid, but there's so much more going on round about there, dude. It's I had my mum on one night telling about ghost stories, and the whole Loch Ness Monster, for me though, to answer your question, I've moved from scientific into the supernatural. And there's something in Scotland called a kelpie, and they're water spirits, and they shapeshift. And my own family, there's a story of one day back in the day, cycling along the road to Invermoriston, and it was misty, it was foggy, it was early in the morning. You've got the hill on one side, the road, and then down into the loch. And the story was, the report goes, that it was almost like a camel type creature with an entity that appeared to be like a Native American on its back. And it went over the road right in front of these 4 or 5 multiple witnesses, and you're talking maybe just after the wartime. So back in the day when you really wouldn't talk about things like that up in the Highlands because people would think you're mad. But because there's different descriptions of what people see, I think it's got that supernatural shape-shifting kind of thing to it. But that's just my take,
Well, I find that fascinating because those are aspects. Like I said, I was fascinated with Loch Ness growing up, and then other things kind of caught my eye, and I got more into the UFOs and more into the hauntings, and then of course Mothman, and from Mothman it became other cryptids, other flying entities. Then we haven't even gotten into the other entities across the U.S. sightings from back in the 50s in Houston, the Jersey Devil, all in the Native American mythology.
The Chicago one now.
The Chicago sightings now. It's one of those things. Again, is it mass hysteria? Are we seeing things? Are they, as Keel thought, are they slipping between dimensions? Is that what we're seeing? Are they actually in our dimension? Of course, there's the image that we shared on Warrior Mode, the photo that was taken just about 20 miles west of where I live back. Actually, Ironically, it was taken on July 11th of this year. That was the exact day that I had my daughter and her friends in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, retracing the steps of Mothman, and someone had photographed a winged creature about 20 miles west of where I live now in southeast Kentucky. And I've dubbed it the Somerset Mothman. I've had it analyzed by one image expert, and it's still in the hands of another, but we've talked about it on Warrior Mode. And it's one of those, does it fit the description of the traditional Mothman? Not at all. Is it obviously a winged entity, a winged creature? It absolutely is, and it is very much more moth-like than it is man-like. It's much more the insect animal direction than it is a humanoid. So I think when you, and of course there's stories now, I think, is it LA or San Diego airport with the human with the jetpack flying about 3,000 feet in the air?
LAX, and you got San
LAX,
Antonio,
yes.
people seeing it down there. You had a mass sighting years ago, I think it was the 80s, down in Mexico, humanoids flying.
Yes.
Yeah, so we usually look at things from like a theological standpoint, right? I mean, does it talk about flying demonic entities in the sky? Come the time, cometh the hour, and nobody knows the hour. I get it.
No, they don't, and I think, you know, the closest we have is that passage that, you know, when that day, that hour draws near, that there will be signs and wonders in the heavens. And so, I mean, but that's an extremely broad statement. What is a sign?
Exactly.
What is a wonder? What constitutes the heavens? So I think that's a very broad statement.
Again, that's more on the observer, because everyone's going to have their own interpretation, right?
It is. And so when you look at cultures, and we talked about this on the Warrior Mode episode, when you look at cultures, look at Christianity, look at Islam, look at Hindu, look at Native American, and all of these have winged entities in them. Every civilization, all the way back to ancient Sumeria, had winged flying entities. The Mesoamericans had Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent, the flying serpent that supposedly brought knowledge and technology to the Mesoamerican people. You know, are we really just seeing the same entities over and over and over, described by the cultural lens that they are seen through? Are we witnessing mass hysteria across the world, across civilizations that had no interaction with one another whatsoever at the time? Or are we dealing with a race memory, something that is deeply ingrained and rooted in us as humankind, that we remember these things, we know they've existed, and so cultures have continued to tell that story and paint that picture. And that has become our narrative. That's one of the things that fascinated me about Mothman. The original sightings in Point Pleasant, 66 to 67, there's no photograph. No one ever took a picture of Mothman. And even in some of the most questionable instances, the famous Loch Ness photograph from back in, I guess it was the 20s, the one that was
very questionable. Yeah, the surgeon's one, very. I mean, let's face it, that's fake.
Yeah. Bigfoot sighting, the 68 tape, UFO video footage, photographs, pictures of supposed ghosts, orbs, whatever you want to call it, there's always something. Mothman doesn't have that. So what we are left with is an oral history, an oral tradition, literally being handed down from eyewitness to eyewitness to eyewitness. They're talking about it. And when you look at the eyewitness accounts, they all saw the same thing. There were variations. So it kind of goes back to what you're talking about with the Kelpie and the shape-shifting aspect. There might even be that with Mothman, because the rudimentary components were the same. Tall, red eyes, wings. Color changed sometimes. The height variation, 7 to 9 feet tall. Sometimes it looked like it was wearing a cloak or a tunic.
And you know, I'm okay with that, because you'll appreciate as well. Me and you could witness a car crash.
Yes.
And we'd see totally different things, right? You take our eyewitness accounts and you think, these guys were looking at two different crashes. But, again, in the eye of the beholder, right?
Eye of the beholder. But then again, the other thing that fascinated me was, okay, what if, in Point Pleasant at least, and I think this rings true for other sightings, what if there is not a Mothman,
Excuse
but
me, it's
Mothman,
ma'am.
It might be a Mothman.
Excuse me, it's ma'am.
or Mothmen, or Moth people.
Moth
What if
people.
what we're seeing is not one entity, but many entities that are going to have similarities in their look and appearance, but they're also going to be very different.
Yep. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. You know, going back to Loch Ness on my side of the pond here, growing up, yeah, Nessie's a thing, but again, because the area is so steeped in woo, it's like the haunted locations. It's like you've got the big abbey there, very haunted. You've got the old convent, very haunted. There's the old schoolhouse, very haunted. You've got the dance hall where there was a story of the handsome man and the lights came on at the end of the night and the girl that was dancing with him looked down, he had a kilt on and he had cloven feet and he ran out the hall and I always come back to this, Travis, and I'll get your take on it. I don't think it's an accident that Aleister Crowley, with all his wealth, just happened upon going there by chance. I think for some reason, some document, some text that he would have been privy to, something pointed him to a location where maybe already he didn't have to take down as many walls to get to the world he was going to.
Well, I was going to say, I would go even a step further, Kev, and he may not have even had documents that he was privy to, just being in tune with and attuned to that other dimension. He could have very easily been drawn to there just because of his vibration.
Yeah, and I've seen documents that that says it's the writings of Crowley, but it's online and you don't know. But it says that there's only mention of like why he chose there was because what we're saying here, you know, there was already the story of the monster there. What better place than to do the work in that he was going to try and do, where there's obviously some portal, you know.
And I think that is, you know, Crowley is one of those individuals that does fascinate me. His story, his life is very. It was disturbed, but it's also very intriguing. I mean, to see where he
ties in
started.
with so much, even with present day, because the Hollywood crowd, I'm not knocking anyone's beliefs, but they worship the guy.
They do. And you know, ironically, though, there's never really been, you know, talking about the Hollywood crowd, there's never really been a movie that kind of depicts his life and what he was about and what he was attempting to do. And I think, you know, from an entertainment standpoint, that would be a fascinating watch.
That in itself is quite telling when you think about it.
It really is.
You know, and then up there right now, the old property, it's burnt down not once but twice. Now it's been bought up by a charitable foundation who have put signs up saying that there's anti-climb paint, and if you get poisoned by the paint, it's at your own risk. They've also had the audacity to say it's a drone-free zone, but more importantly, they're talking about opening up a spiritual retreat, restoring the property to its Edwardian kind of splendor, and teaching Thelema on the property. So, what do you make of that, dude?
That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, very.
It's also
disturbing.
It is. I mean, because that's going down a road. I'm not sure.
I mean, in an already supercharged supernatural place.
Well, you know, we talked about that the night that I had my daughter on the show with me. You know, that was one of the reasons I did not take her physically to the site of the mental asylum where that I experienced all of the haunting, and honestly believe that something attached itself to me in the early years of 2003 through well until I had the
And Travis, none of us truly know what we're dealing with.
We don't, and we really didn't, because we literally stumbled on this place and were walking through it, videoing, photographing, and then we started researching and finding out about its horrible past. But you don't take people who are overly sensitive to the supernatural and the paranormal, the empaths, the utter empaths, and you don't put them in a spiritually charged environment and not expect some very
Powerful, explosive,
explosive
yeah.
results.
It's like a very combustible situation that you're setting
Yes.
up there, you know. Travis, I have, like I knew I would, thoroughly enjoyed tonight. I suppose, you know, I should really give a shout out to the audience. It's like been sitting here talking with a friend about really cool topics. So, tell us a little bit about some of the stations that you work at. I mean, what's going on there, man?
Well, I have the pleasure to be the general manager for 3 radio stations in southeast Kentucky. I have a classic country station. I have a classic hits station, which is 60s to early 2000s. And I have a current hit station, which is about 2005 to 2020. I've got a great team here. I've got a great salesperson, Alyssa Emmett, does a great job for me. I've got 2 great on-air personalities, Dave Begley and Terry Harris, both veterans in the field, and I've got a good telesales department with Larry and James, and then I've got a second digital rep, another James, his last name is England, and then I've got a new guy that just joined me, Brian Simmons. So we've got a really coherent and cohesive team. We're doing, trying to do the best we can through this COVID pandemic of keeping our businesses alive, keeping our clients alive, keeping the radio stations in the forefront. Ironically, this month, September, marks 28 years in broadcasting for me. This is my 28th anniversary.
Hey, well done, man.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's been a combination of radio and television, on air, producing, the ad agency world, creating programs, creating TV shows, creating radio programs. So 28 years ago, I started as an on-air personality for a little country radio station in my hometown, and was working the afternoons and then midday, and then I am now the general manager for 3 radio stations in a 25 station family. We've got, the ownership has 25 radio stations in 9 markets in 3 states. And so life has been very good.
Awesome. And of course, we have got Warrior Mode on Sundays on YouTube. I want to give a big shout out to one of our listeners and her husband, Nanette. A big shout out to you. A lot of love and good vibes sent your way here from the team at KBS. So with that said, Travis, I can't thank you enough for tonight. We need to do this again sometime. We can talk about so many more topics that are out there. I look forward to doing it again.
We absolutely can. I am at your disposal, my friend. You just tell me when you want me, and I will make time.
Oh, we will definitely do this. I'm thinking of shows already. We've got Skinwalker. We both like that.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got the ongoing disclosure debacle, as I call it, in ufology. 2020, it's a year where people like me and you thrive. Because there's never a shortage of things to talk about, right?
There's not. I did see something very funny on Facebook the other day, and it said basically the best way that they could describe 2020 as if a time traveler from the future has come back in time to make things right, but every time they do, they just keep screwing it up even more.
Maybe that's what's happened. Maybe this is it. Folks, wherever you are, make it TFR. Stay tuned, more live radio coming up. And like Johnny Whistles used to say, Denny, touch that dial.